Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day today. I wanted to go over some tips with Phalaenopsis orchids with you all. I've received several questions on how to get a really good bloom cycle from your Phalaenopsis orchids, what to do with them when you bring them home, how long do you isolate them, how often do you water them. So I thought I would go over those questions with you today. I brought this Harlequin fowl home with me last week. And when I got it home, the very first thing that I did after I unboxed it was I cleaned the leaves. I clean the leaves really well when I bring them home. I look for any signs of bugs, any signs of infestations, or things that I need to be concerned with as far as taking care of the fowl the first month. So I washed down the leaves and I inspected the bark. The bark on this one is fine. I'm going to repot it in the spring. This is really not the best time of the year to repot unless you absolutely have to. So this bark is fine until March or April when I start seeing some new root growth. So I was asked, how long do I keep this Phalaenopsis in isolation, away from my other plants, just to make sure everything's okay with it? I isolate them about 2 to 4 weeks. If you have room and you can isolate them for about a month, that is wonderful. I just like to keep an eye on them and make sure that there's nothing that pops out, nothing, no bugs, no eggs that you can't see. Once they have a bug infestation, it's so much easier to treat one plant than your entire collection. It just makes it so much easier on you. So let's talk about really good locations for your Phalaenopsis orchids. One of my subscribers asked me, do I need to get a special light for my phals? I keep them near a window in my dining room and light does not filter in. Yes, you'll need to get an artificial light for those. Where I prefer to grow my phals is in eastern facing windows where they get plenty of morning light but not hot sun, like hot afternoon sun. And this is a western facing window that gets dispersed light. I have some plants growing in front of these windows. So when I say western light, they actually get dispersed light through those plants all year long. And they really thrive in front of my kitchen windows. And this is another favorite place for my phals. These are my eastern facing windows in my orchid room. And you see how they get dispersed, dappled light. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, and so they're getting the early morning sun that won't burn them. This is where they thrive. I have found that a little bit of sunlight with your phals really makes them grow well. I'm going to show you a really good way to test the light to see if it's too hot for your phals. If you will place your hand about 12 inches away from your phal, and you see how it shadows the plant a little bit but not a lot. There's not a sharp shadow. That's the way that you can tell that your phals are getting enough light without receiving too much light. Also, if you'll feel the leaves, if they're too warm, then you know you're giving them too much sunlight and you might burn the leaves. Okay, and here is a really good question from Katrina. When your flower spikes are shorter than desired, how do you troubleshoot and determine if it needs more light, less light, or more fertilizer? That is a really good question. This is the first rebloom from my Phal Golden 5, and I am very happy with this spike of flowers. I'm happy with the size of the flowers and with the number of the flowers. When you make sure that you get enough light on your phals, low light is a little bit of misleading thing. They do need some dappled sunlight to make sure that they get the right amount of light. Also, the amount of fertilizer that you give them through the year is very important. If you don't give them enough light, enough fertilizer, and enough water at the times when they need it, they will not rebloom for you well the next year. I have found that usually that first rebloom is what kind of tells you where you need to adjust things. So what happens is when we buy new phals, they have been in these greenhouses where they've been grown in ideal situations. The ideal light, the ideal fertilizer, and they've been watered right on time. That's the reason why your watering routine and your fertilizing routine is so important. They're used to being treated a certain way in those ideal situations. And then we bring them home. And the more you can mimic how they're grown in nature, how they're found in nature, and how they're grown in those greenhouses in those ideal conditions, the better your rebloom is going to be. So the routine care of the plant is going to be really, really important. Learn to identify when your Phalaenopsis needs to be watered. They are thirsty and they're also heavy feeders. That's one thing to keep in mind with Phalaenopsis orchids. Okay, this plant needs to be watered. Do you see how the roots are silvery gray? Okay, so I have figured out that this one likes to be watered every 4 or 5 days. We've had some really high temperatures here at the beginning of December, believe it or not. So every 4 or 5 days for this plant is what it likes. So I'm going to show you the difference between what it looks like when it needs to be watered and then when I water it. And I water these thoroughly. Do you see how the roots green up? So make sure that you're keeping a really good watering routine and a good fertilizer schedule with your phals as well. So how do I fertilize these when I bring them home? I'm not going to fertilize this one yet because it still has 3 buds on it that have not bloomed out. The only times that I don't fertilize my Phalaenopsis orchids is when it's really cold outside and they can't break down the fertilizer, or when they're in bud, especially when the buds are forming. So it'll be a few weeks before I fertilize this one, and I will pick a warm, sunny day. I won't be fertilizing this one on a cold, snowy day, and it looks like our temperatures are going to be going way down later this week. So just be aware that you need to be careful on these cold winter days about fertilizing. But what I'll do is I will give this a low dose of fertilizer. When I'm talking low dose, I take the weekly amount that is on the back of my orchid fertilizer, and I divide that into a quarter or sometimes even an eighth. They need just a little bit of fertilizer while they're in bloom to maintain the plant. If you wait until it comes out of bloom to do any fertilizing, that could be 3 to 4 months. I look for this one to be in bloom for a long time. So I'm maintaining the plant and I'm giving it just a little bit of fertilizer so that it won't look tired by the time it comes out of bloom. And here's my Einstein orchid. I bought this 10 Christmases ago. I love the white blooms, and this is one of the very first orchids that I had a lot of success with. And so it blooms beautifully for me every year. As you see, it's in front of a western-facing window. There is a tree outside the window, so it just gets dappled afternoon light. It's always loved being in this window, and it reblooms for me every single year. The blooms on this one are huge. So I hope you all have great success growing your Phalaenopsis orchids and be highly favored, deeply loved, and greatly blessed. And we'll talk to you all next time.